Let's talk about Coachtopia. So this is one of those situations where you need to just be an informed consumer and understand exactly what you're buying before you make that investment. In several of my videos, I tell you that don't buy something just because it's made out of good leather. You have to consider construction and hardware, and Coachtopia is a classic example of why construction really matters when it comes to longevity of a bag. The premise of Coachtopia is they take leather scraps and reconstruct it into a new bag. This is different from recycled leather or bonded leather in that they're actually cutting out new shapes from the leftover leather hide that they use to make bags and repurpose it into making new styles. So that's why you'll see in a lot of these alter ego Coachtopia bags that they're cutting out little squares and then sewing them into a new layer to then make a bag out of it. So here's where the problem lies. Even though the base of the leather may be full grain, exactly the type of leather that they use to construct your normal Coach bags, whenever you take a hide and cut it into smaller pieces and sew it back together, you compromise the structural integrity of that piece of hide. I'm going to do a demonstration to illustrate this for you, and I'm going to use a piece of paper. A piece of paper like this, uncut, is at its strongest. So when you put stuff on top, it's going to maintain its structural integrity. But as soon as you cut the same piece of paper and tape it together, the structural integrity is compromised. More or less the same is true for leather. So you want to buy bags that are constructed from one piece of uncut leather. So as much as possible, keep the structural integrity of the original hide. And obviously you need to make cuts to structure the bag in a certain way, and that's perfectly fine. But leather behaves very differently than clothing, textiles, in that you can cut up a piece of cotton and sew it back together and the structural integrity won't be as compromised as if you cut up a piece of leather and sew it back together. So remember that whenever you put holes in a piece of leather, you're perforating it. You're not making it stronger. And whenever you do stitch marks, like you punch holes to sew two pieces of leather together, those are all points of degradation. So where it could potentially fray and act like a perforation where it can rip, right? Let's do this demonstration. I'm starting from two pieces of paper from the same notepad. I'm cutting one of them up and taping them back together here. In this first clip here, you'll see how an uncut piece of paper holds items I carry around in my bags. Notice how it doesn't buckle in a certain way. The weight is evenly more or less distributed and it's easy to handle. This is my piece of paper that I cut up and taped back together. And I'm going to place the same items on this piece of paper here. Structurally, you'll see how it just doesn't behave in that same way as the uncut piece of paper. It kind of buckles in certain places, and generally it's unstable. Obviously, this is more of a crude demonstration, but you get the idea of what to expect from pieces of leather that have been sewn back together. There are more things to consider. For example, these bags are lined, so you get a little bit more structural integrity there. But one thing to note is that the outside of the bag is still exposed to the elements. So would I use a Coachtopia bag for everyday use? I probably wouldn't, only because it won't hold up as well as the same Coach bag made from the same leather that has been kept whole and not cut up and sewn back together. So maybe you really like how one of these bags look. I would just take all of this information into consideration and change the way that you use the bag if you're really interested in buying one of these bags.